The truth about Roy Orbison has finally come out.
I don't quite know how to feel when so many people compliment me and use words like legend or inspiration, or things like that. These were just gifts that I was given.
Roy Orbison, a rock legend with a career spanning over 3 decades, was one of the most influential musicians of his time. The 1960s saw him dominate the charts with timeless hits like "Oh, Pretty Woman" and "Crying," securing his place as a leading star of the era. Despite his success, Roy's life was far from easy. He endured countless personal tragedies and passed away just as he was enjoying a remarkable career resurgence in the late 1980s. Now, after years of speculation, his 5 children have finally revealed what many have long suspected about their father. Curious to know more? Let's dive in. Childhood Roy Orbison was born in Vernon, Texas on the 23rd of April 1936 to Orby Lee Orbison and Nadine Vesta Schultz as the second of 3 sons. His father Orby worked as an oil field driller, but he was barely making enough for his family of 5 to get by. And after the Great Depression hit, he ended up struggling to find work. His wife Nadine was the opposite of her husband. While he relished in manual labor and his ability to provide, she enjoyed painting and even wrote poetry from time to time. Eventually, the family moved to Fort Worth in 1942, so they could find better work in the aircraft factories. Roy's direct paternal ancestor can be traced to Thomas Orbison, who was born in 1715 and moved from Lurgan, Northern Ireland, to settle in the province of Pennsylvania mid-century. And there was one definite way you could tell his descendants apart, as they all inherited eyesight problems that caused them to wear thick glasses. Unfortunately, as early as 4 years old, Roy also began to don his pair of thick glasses that would evolve into the dark frames we all know and love. Roy developed a liking for music from his early childhood days after his father presented him with a guitar for his 6th birthday. Although he didn't know how to play, his father and older brother were ever ready to teach him, and by the time he turned 7, music became his overall focus in life. Roy revealed that his major musical influence as a youth was country music, and he had a particular liking for Lefty Frizzle's singing, especially the ones where the slurred syllables were very evident. He was so moved by this style of singing that during his time with the Traveling Wilburys, he adopted the stage name Lefty Wilbury. In addition to Lefty's singing, he also enjoyed Hank Williams, Moon Mullican, and Jimmie Rodgers. Interestingly, one of the first musicians whom he had the opportunity to hear in person was Ernest Tubb, who was then playing on the back of a truck in Fort Worth. Fort Worth was quite important in Roy's musical upbringing, as he once shared that an experience that really stuck with him at the time was his regular singing sessions at Fort Worth, because he was constantly surrounded by soldiers who were emotional as they were about to be sent to the front line. Soon after, he was exposed to rhythm and blues, Tex-Mex, the orchestral arrangements of Mantovani, and Cajun music in West Texas. The Cajun favorite Joel Blon really made an impression on him and became one of the first songs that he would sing in public. At 8, Roy began showcasing his singing talents on a local radio show, going on to become the show's host by the late 1940s. Anyway, at 9, Roy entered and won a radio station contest on KVWC, and this led to his own radio show where he belted the same tunes every week. But although he loved music and was seemingly making progress in the field, he was still very much interested in schooling. He attended Denver Avenue Elementary School in Fort Worth. However, after a polio scare in 1944, his parents sent him and his brother Grady Lee to Vernon to live with their grandmother. At the time, Roy was only 8 years old, and World War II was winding down, prompting Roy's parents to later return to Vernon. However, they would once again move in 1946, to Wink, Texas in search of employment. But Roy wasn't particularly happy with this move. He described life there as football, oil fields, oil, grease, and sand, and was so relieved when he was finally able to leave the desolate town. When he was much younger, he couldn't care less about his appearance, but as puberty began to hit and he started to become more socially conscious, Roy decided to start dyeing his almost white hair black. He was self-conscious about his appearance, and the white hair wasn't helping matters as he was naturally quiet, kept to himself, and was remarkably polite and helpful. Roy was so quiet that during recess at school, he would often sit alone and play the guitar all by himself while the other kids were out on the field, playing physical games together. This attitude added up to his self-consciousness. As due to his lack of sporting ability, he became very shy and constantly dealt with low self-esteem. But whenever it was time to sing, Roy put the shyness away and was instead often keen to sing. Nonetheless, he still described his voice as memorable, but not special. He might have been shy, but when it came to music, he always had the best ideas, and one of these would lead to the creation of his very first band. Wink Westerners. 13-year-old Roy had an epiphany to round up a couple of people and have them form a band. It was from this epiphany that Wink Westerners was formed in 1949 with 3 of his friends from school who had bonded over their shared love for music. Billy Pat Ellis was the designated drummer. Slob Evans was on bass fiddle, Richard West on piano, and James Morrow was on electric mandolin. They were more in tune with country standard music and played lots of Glenn Miller songs at local honky-tonk bars and their weekly morning radio show on Curb in Kermit, Texas. Their first live performance was at a school assembly in 1953, and they were even offered $400 to play at a dance. It was at this moment that Roy realized he could make a living from music. So when he turned 15, he decided that rather than become a guitar player, it was time to have the guitar accompany his singing instead. With this new decision, the band was actively seeking work and recognition, so they entered a talent contest on KMID television in Midland, Texas in 1953. Thankfully, they won the contest, and the reward was a 30-minute spot on a local television show. As soon as the show ended, Roy asked the owner of the company sponsoring the show if he could sponsor the group for other ongoing shows. He agreed, leading the group to play weekly shows on KMID television on Friday nights and Odessa television station KOSA TV on Saturday nights. Upon graduation from high school in 1954, Roy decided to further his education by enrolling at North Texas State College in Denton to study geology. It was supposedly his backup plan to secure work in the oil fields in case music didn't work out. However, the course bored him out of his mind in the first year, and he ended up switching to history and English. But Roy still preferred to play music with fellow students Billy Pat Ellis, Dick Penner, and Wade Moore. Plus, Penner and Moore had recently written a simple, catchy rockabilly song called Ooby Dooby, which impressed Orbison, leading him to begin to look into how they could record the song. His resolve was further strengthened when he heard the news that his schoolmate Pat Boone had signed a record deal. Soon enough, the band switched styles to rock and roll after a New Year's Eve dance they were performing at in 1954 ended with them playing Shake, Rattle, and Roll repeatedly. Plus, Elvis Presley also had a good amount of influence on him since he had seen him perform in 1954, and was very impressed by his antics on stage. The Teen Kings. Unfortunately, at the end of the semester, Roy found himself dropping out of North Texas State College to go to Odessa Junior College. Sadly, the Wink Westerners were also disbanded in the fall of 1955, leading Roy to form a new band which they called the Teen Kings. The band members included Roy, Billy Pat Ellis, and James Morrow from the Wink Westerners, plus Jack Kennelly on bass and Johnny Wilson. Interestingly, Roy would meet his future wife, 14-year-old Claudette Frady, at a dance the Teen Kings were performing at. Roy's wish finally came true, and the band was able to record their first song, Ooby Dooby, at Norman Petty's studio in Clovis, New Mexico, in March 1956. Soon enough, it was published by Odessa-based startup label G. Well as the B-side of the J.E. Well 101 single. After the song's publication, Roy was convinced that a larger record company would have the power to sell more copies of the record, so he spoke to a lawyer about terminating the contract with G. Well. They eventually reached an agreement, and the band was now free to find a new label to market Ooby Dooby. However, there was a setback, as he had cut a demo of the song for Columbia Records, which they turned down, but had one of their contract artists, Sid King, release a recording of Ooby Dooby before Orbison could offer the tape to another record company. After a series of events, struggles, and occasional clashes, Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, finally offered the Teen Kings a contract. They then went on to Sun Studio in Memphis to re-record Ooby Dooby for publication by their new record, and Sam Phillips signed the band up for a year or two. However, their career soon slumped, since Roy wanted to record emotional ballads instead of the rockabilly songs Sam was demanding, leading Sam's search for an Elvis Presley successor from Roy to Carl Perkins. Shortly after, Carl was badly injured in a car crash, granting the Teen Kings a reprieve that resulted in Ooby Dooby being released, along with Go 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 as Sun Single 242 in May 1956. The Teen Kings soon began an experimental tour of drive-in theaters in the southern U.S. states, with Sonny James, Johnny Horton, Carl Perkins, and Cash. Roy was very influenced by Elvis Presley, and as a result, during his performances, he often performed frenetically, doing everything they could to get applause because he believed that they had only one hit record. In June of 1956, Ooby Dooby peaked at number 59 on the Billboard charts and sold 200,000 copies. However, the follow-up singles didn't reach the charts. The band soon began to encounter problems within themselves when a performance at the Overton Park Shell on June 1, 1956, started an argument about whom Elvis Presley had praised. Apparently, Elvis was in the audience for this performance, and Roy had claimed that the singer had praised him. However, another band member argued that it was Jack Kennelly, the band's bass player, that Elvis had actually praised. It also didn't help that Jack believed Roy wanted to be a star by all means, and as soon as Sam inflated his ego, he could no longer be humble enough to be a part of a unit, leading him to become egomaniacal. And it appeared to be true, as Roy soon purchased a brand new Cadillac and a diamond ring with his first royalty check from Ooby Dooby. Soon enough, the band discovered their paychecks from the concerts were not covering their costs, and that life as a touring band was a demoralizing experience, since their contract did not include any royalty payments when their songs were played on the radio, and Roy had unfortunately run out of money by late 1956. After gaining encouragement from Norman Petty to record a single without the Teen Kings, Roy possibly began to consider it. During a recording session, the rest of the band walked out on Roy after he shared his plan to rename the band Roy Orbison and the Teen Kings. Officially, they split up in December 1956, with Sam himself attesting that the basic problem they had was Roy's loner and egotistical tendencies. Unfortunately, the fact that there was no band to play with proved to be an issue for Roy, as his contract with Sun Records had no use for a singer who didn't have a band. Stardom. So in 1956, he set out to become a solo artist. After the split, Roy stayed with his girlfriend, Claudette, in Sam's home in Memphis. He was now a broke artist who realized he couldn't survive as a recording artist, so after a few weeks, he returned to the road to tour with Johnny Cash, Sonny Burgess, Eddie Cochran, and Gene Vincent, mostly playing songs from other artists before finishing the set with a song of his own. At the time, Roy had become addicted to sleeping pills and speed, and after he was introduced to Elvis's social circle, at some stage he even picked Elvis's date up for him in his purple Cadillac. Anyway, in August 1957, he returned to the Sun recording studio and recorded several new songs with just his acoustic guitar rather than a band. However, his efforts proved to be unsuccessful, and he eventually gave up on being a recording artist. Sam remembered being more impressed with Roy's mastery of the guitar than his voice. Roy soon returned to West Texas to be with his 16-year-old Claudette, and the two soon began to talk about getting married. Once again, Roy tried his hands at singing ballads, and after writing The Clown, he was met with a lukewarm response. A producer at Sun Records even told him that he would never make it as a ballad singer. Nonetheless, he still made sure to pitch his ballad Claudette to singers he met on tour, and he finally got lucky in April 1958 when the Everly Brothers recorded it as the B-side of their hit, All I Have to Do Is Dream. Claudette was able to snag the number 30 spot in the charts in March of 1959. However, Roy soon left Sun Records as a result of a dispute about royalties from the song Claudette. Finally, Roy and Claudette got married in 1957, birthing their first child in 1958, and with the royalty payments from Claudette, Roy purchased the most expensive new Cadillac available. Sadly, he and his wife spent the money they had lavishly, soon became broke, and began to live with Roy's parents in Wink. The following year, he quit performing for 7 months, making his living from 1958-1959 at Acuff Rose Music, a songwriting firm that concentrated on making country music. His job was to write a song, make several demonstration tapes, and send them to Wesley Rose, who would try to find musical acts to record them. Following this, he worked with Chet Atkins, a guitarist for Elvis, whom he was also in awe of. Roy's life was soon reduced to a loop of playing shows at night, living with his wife and young child in a tiny apartment, and taking his guitar with him to his car to write new songs. His perseverance paid off, and soon enough, he met and worked with Fred Foster, a producer at Monument Records, the record label that he would soon switch to. At Monument, Roy's style was brought to life, and it gave his music a polished professional sound, finally allowing his stylistic inclinations free rein. He soon recorded 3 new songs, the most notable of which was Uptown, written with Joe Melson and released in late 1959. Joe was very impressed with the results, so much so that he recalled it as the most beautiful sound in the world at the time. Uptown was a rather modest hit, and the first song by Rob and Joe to reach the Billboard Top 100. Interestingly, this success came just as the 1950s rock and roll era was wrapping up. In early 1960, Roy and Joe collaborated on another song, Only the Lonely Know the Way I Feel, which marked a huge departure from Roy's previous work. They incorporated elements from previous songs, added strings and backing singers, and Roy even showcased his powerful voice with a notable falsetto note. Despite trying to pitch the song to Elvis Presley in Memphis, Roy ended up recording it in Nashville using a new mixing technique that became his signature sound. Only the Lonely was a massive hit, reaching number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topping charts in the UK and Australia, propelling him to stardom practically overnight. Following this success, Roy continued to tailor songs to highlight his vocal abilities. He and Joe penned hits like Blue Angel and I'm Hurtin', which solidified Roy's reputation as a unique voice in the music industry. His move to Nashville with his family further fueled his creative output, leading to songs like Running Scared, which showcased his vocal range and emotional intensity. Roy's distinctive style also garnered him more chart toppers like Crying, Dream Baby, How Long Must I Dream, and Workin' for the Man. His dramatic ballads ended up earning him the nickname The Big O during a tour in Australia. Despite personal and professional challenges, his influence in the music world remained unmatched, making him one of the top-selling American artists of the early 1960s. Tragedies. Roy had married his sweetheart back in 1957, and although the duo went through some very difficult and tough times, at least they were happy together. Unfortunately, their relationship would soon be thrust into tempestuous territory as Roy's rise to fame began to take its toll on them. In November 1964, news began to spread of the possibility of a divorce between the couple. Soon enough, the divorce became a reality, and it became known that Claudette had allegedly been engaged in an affair. The news at the time claimed that touring had kept Roy away from his family, and his young wife couldn't withstand being lonely and alone. So she took matters into her own hands and engaged in a relationship with the contractor who built their home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Following the split, Roy moved far from his broken home while touring Australia with the Rolling Stones, Rolf Harris, and Dionne Warwick. Despite accepting second billing to the Stones, the tour was a triumph for Roy, paving the way for his #1 hit, Penny Arcade, years later in the U.S. After the tour, Roy returned to Tennessee but leased his home due to painful memories of Claudette. Despite their divorce, Roy realized he still loved her, and 10 months after their divorce, they reunited joyously in London in 1968, deciding to remarry, reconcile, and toss their differences aside. Fortunately, this reunion coincided with Roy signing a lucrative $1 million deal with MGM, marking his entry into the film industry he cherished. This allowed him to tour less and spend more time at home, and with extra time on their hands, Roy and Claudette indulged in their shared passion for motorbikes, frequently riding on racetracks and tours worldwide. Roy's life seemed secure with his family reunited, but while on tour in England, Roy had a motorcycle accident, which was the beginning of a series of tragic events. Despite reconciling, their dangerous lifestyle caught up with them, and another tragedy struck on June 6, 1966, when Claudette collided with a pickup truck while riding her motorbike, tragically losing her life. Following this devastating loss, Roy immersed himself in creativity, channeling his emotions into his work. Despite pouring hours into writing and touring, Roy felt disconnected from the changing times and his personal circumstances, as he remarked later. He didn't hear a lot he could relate to, so he kind of stood there like a tree where the winds blow and the seasons change, and you're still there and you bloom again. During this relentless period of work, Roy spent less time with his sons and more time in studios, and on lengthy world tours. Another catastrophe struck in September 1968 in Birmingham, England, when Roy learned that a fire had claimed the lives of his two eldest sons at their home in Tennessee. These losses plunged Roy into deep emotional turmoil. However, he did find some solace in 1969 when he married Barbara Jacobs, with whom he would later have 2 children. Unfortunately, his grief significantly impacted his ability to work, and although he regained stability in his personal life, his musical career suffered a decline. Roy experienced a resurgence in the 1980s with the Traveling Wilburys and a renewed appreciation for his 1960s work in popular culture. Nevertheless, the personal tragedies he endured continued to shape the latter part of his career. Despite this, Roy's resilience allowed him to use his talents to bring joy to others through his art, even as he suffered on a personal level. The Traveling Wilburys. The emergence of the Traveling Wilburys marked a unique convergence of rock legends, each bearing a storied past that defied simple myth. The mysterious quintet, dubbed Lucky, Lefty, Nelson, Otis, and Charlie T. Jr., seemed to emerge from the annals of a bygone era of wandering minstrels. But in truth, they were a musical dream team composed of Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. Before they collaborated in 1988, these icons had individually navigated the tumultuous waters of rock stardom, each entangled in their share of rumor and speculation. Roy, having shared the stage with the Beatles during the height of Beatlemania, had already solidified his fame across the UK. Meanwhile, Dylan and Harrison had fostered a dynamic friendship amid the competitive currents of 60s rock, exemplified by Dylan's rare appearance at Harrison's concert for Bangladesh. Harrison's knack for drawing talent into his orbit saw Jeff Lynne producing Cloud 9, while Dylan toured alongside Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, setting the stage for a serendipitous musical rendezvous. The seeds of the Traveling Wilburys were sown when Harrison enlisted the others to craft a B-side for his single, This Is Love. Petty was roped in casually during a visit to retrieve a guitar, resulting in the birth of Handle with Care, a gem that begged for a full album. Shedding their star personas, these legends reveled in the joy of creation, spinning a musical yarn that spanned several genres and eras, personifying the very essence of Americana. The moniker Traveling Wilburys was a nod to Lynne and Harrison's studio antics, and a deliberate departure from the stuffy names of yore. In the studio, magic ensued, with echoes of rock, country, and pop intertwining to create a supergroup that encapsulated the collective soul of American music. Their debut album, Traveling Wilburys Volume 1, dropped to eager anticipation and critical acclaim, breathing new life into the careers of Dylan and Petty. The Grammy-winning record catapulted the Wilburys into the limelight, proving that they just seemed to work very well together. Tragically, the group was marred by Roy's untimely passing in December 1988, casting a dark shadow over their future endeavors. Despite Harrison's vision for a series of Wilburys albums and a film, the group's flame flickered. After 1991, though the individual members continued to intertwine on various solo projects, the 2007 reissue of the Traveling Wilburys collection reignited interest in their legacy, featuring music videos and a documentary that celebrated the band's enigmatic journey. Roy's death left a deep mark on the Wilburys, prompting heartfelt tributes and reflection on what could have been. The remaining quartet, devastated by his loss, opted against replacing him, instead choosing to preserve the unique magic of their brief but impactful collaboration. The Traveling Wilburys will always be remembered for their enduring togetherness and musical teamwork that defined an era. Death and legacy. Roy's career was at an all-time high in 1988. His album Mystery Girl was completed in November 1988. His career was at a resurgence, and the Traveling Wilburys' first album was a success. The 52-year-old was already fostering intentions to write an autobiography, and even hoped Martin Sheen would play him in a biopic. After all the challenges and tragedies he'd gone through in the past, surely he was happy to have things go his way this time around. All he had to worry about was the little chest pains he had told Johnny Cash he was experiencing. But it was just a little, and he could still travel to Europe to receive an award and play a show in Antwerp. A few days after playing his gig, a manager at a club in Boston where he was performing shared his worries that Roy's health might be declining, but the singer made sure to complete his performance. He even performed at the Front Row Theater in Ohio on December 4th, then returned home to Hendersonville to chill out for a few days before flying to London to film 2 more videos. 2 days later, he and his sons flew model planes together and then had dinner at his mother's house. Sadly, later that day, he would die of a heart attack at the age of 52. 9 years before his death, Roy had an open-heart surgery known as triple bypass surgery, a common type of heart surgery in adults to help blood flow to the heart after it has been restricted by coronary heart disease, which occurs when fatty material builds up in the arteries, thereby restricting blood flow. Following the surgery, Roy began to have issues with his weight fluctuating, something he had no control over due to his heart condition before his eventual death. He was survived by his second wife, Barbara, the 2 sons they had together, Roy Jr. and Alexander, and the youngest son he had with Claudette, Wesley. Sadly, Barbara passed away 23 years after her husband's death from cervical cancer, leaving the 3 brothers as orphans. However, they remain united in their love and admiration for their father, leading them to constantly strive to keep his memory alive. Alex, also known as Orby, is a drummer, writer, director, and film producer. He is also president of Still Working Music Group, a publishing company, and president and co-founder of Roy's Boys, LLC, where he manages his father's legacy alongside his brothers. Roy Orbison Jr., on the other hand, followed his father's footsteps, becoming a musician and record producer. Together, the sons produced and remastered a completely unheard track that was released to the public in 2014. For them, hearing their father's voice come alive once again was a huge moment. 9 never-before-heard tracks from the 1960s icon were released on the deluxe edition of Mystery Girl. The Orbison brothers were able to fulfill their lifelong dream of playing along with their father on a record by adding guitar and drums to the tracks. Plus, they had John Carter Cash, the son of Johnny Cash, the legendary country singer, adding to the rock royalty proceedings on the album. According to Alex, the entire process really brought the siblings together in a lot of ways. Their parents would certainly be proud of them for it. Let us know how Roy's incredible story has inspired you in the comments below.